Welcome, everybody. I'm Abdi Soltani, Executive Director of the ACLU of Northern California. My only job today as a member of the steering committee of the Blue Ribbon Commission is to keep time and manage the public comment. And with that, I'm going to introduce the chair of the Blue Ribbon Commission on marijuana policy, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom.
Thanks, Abdi, and thank you all very much for taking the time to be here, and we're going to try to respect your time and move this process along. I want to thank not only those of you that are here physically on the UCLA campus, and notably thank UCLA for their willingness to host this forum, but also those of you that have joined us online. We've got a robust effort to reach out beyond the physical walls here in Southern California to people all up and down the state on our safeandsmartpolicy.org site. And we've got chat rooms set up, and we have other ways folks to interact, including asking panelists questions as we open up things to public comment. Just point of context, this process started, this Blue Ribbon Commission started in October of 2013. It was organized with the leadership of the ACLU and consists of roughly 21 members from disparate walks of life and points of view. Some on the panel, or rather some that participated in our commission, were vehemently opposed to any consideration, let alone the application of a real advanced conversation around the legalization and taxation for recreational use of marijuana, and some were very, very supportive and thought it was long overdue. We had representatives from law enforcement, we had children advocates concerned about brain development, we had folks that were out there just as simple parents that were concerned about the message, quote unquote, we would be sending to the public. We had people participating that were very much involved in the efforts in Colorado and Washington, and were out there making a case at the time when we initiated this that other states like Oregon and Alaska, which eventually moved forward with their own legalization strategies, that were making the case for those states as well, and we're eager to see something happen here in California. At the time, there was an effort to actually short-circuit the 2016 ballot and put something on the 2014 ballot. And candidly, many of us that were participants in this commission, this Blue Ribbon Commission, were concerned that we hadn't asked, let alone answered, all the tough questions. And I make the point, ask, not just answer, because there are a lot of questions that do need to be asked and a lot of questions that do need to be answered, I believe, before we put something on the ballot, and moreover, before the process of implementation, if indeed it's successful on the ballot, goes forward. So for us, this progress report that we put out, that we hope you'll take a look at, that has initiated this, one of the first of 3 formal forums that we'll be holding across the state, was an opportunity to ask those questions and now engage you in helping us answer those questions. And in the absence of the questions themselves, we ask you to ask all of us what we're missing, because we recognize the limitation of 21 points of view and the studies that we were receiving and reading and the information we were considering, that there are things perhaps that we did not consider. We focused on 3 core areas: public safety, and that's the purpose of today's forum. We focused on the regulatory and tax system, which is the subject of a second forum, and of course the concern, and I have this as a parent of 3 young kids, the concern around our children and the concern around their health and their safety and their fate and their future. So that's the sort of contextual framework for this. Let me just offer now more subjective personal comments, and then we'll open it up to our leader of this committee on the task force, and we'll open up to a robust conversation, and then open it up to all of you for your feedback and insight. I've come at this from a very pragmatic perspective. I've long believed that the war on drugs hasn't necessarily lived up to its assertions and to its promises. I've been particularly concerned as a former mayor of San Francisco with our own failed efforts to implement aspects of the war on drugs. I've had the opportunity to see firsthand the efforts and the limitations. And also the scope of our efforts. As someone who worked very collaboratively with our local law enforcement agencies, not just the San Francisco Police Department, which I had the responsibility of overseeing, but also other law enforcement agencies that were part of our efforts of applying some of the principles of this war on drugs. Over the years, I got more and more demoralized by it, more and more frustrated more and more frustrated by the ubiquity of the drug, more and more frustrated that the cost hadn't necessarily increased, more concerned that we were running short of our promises and promotion. And as a consequence of that, my position has become a little bit more open to argument. I'm interested in evidence. I'm not an ideologue about this. I support the taxation, legalization of recreational use for adults, but with caveats and with concerns as any parent and policymaker should have. I'm concerned about the how business. I know the why. I know the why is why a lot of us are here. We know that we need to move in a new direction. Even the status quo that you may not necessarily support legalization, I think most of us in this room, I hope, would agree, and those participating, that the status quo is not that successful. That people are using the drug. It's ubiquitous. Our children, in survey after survey, and we reference 2 surveys, are saying it's easier to get marijuana than it is alcohol. That people are driving under the influence of marijuana today, and that we have a relatively unregulated, I'm trying to be generous, relatively unregulated medical marijuana industry that's very mature. It's been around since 1996, and in many ways, some have argued it's the worst of both worlds. You have a system where you have de facto legalization because of the ubiquity of access, the manipulation, I will say it, oftentimes of people's medical conditions being suspect, the ability then to access at medical dispensaries the drug freely and willingly, but the fact that we're not regulating it, the fact that we're not taxing it, and the fact that we haven't really gotten our arms around it. And so I think it's time to move in a new direction. But I don't want to see big tobacco become big marijuana. I don't want to see every single street corner store turn into a medical dispensary. I don't want to walk down the streets or walk to the playground with my kids and smell it. I don't want to see big marijuana now advertising gummy bears and jelly beans that are infused with the drug, targeting our kids. We saw that with Joe Camel. I don't want to see this done without real consideration to public safety. I don't want to see it done without the support of a robust conversation with people that are responsible for enforcing our laws. I'm concerned about cultivation. I'm concerned about the distribution out of state. I'm concerned about how one advertises, what the concerns that we all have, or what the manifestation of those concerns look like as it relates to a regulatory industry or a regulatory structure that doesn't actually, well, it taxes too high that then perpetuates a black market, which is a concern that a lot of us have, because the idea is to take out the black market and take away the more insidious aspects of this, the cartels and others. If you tax too high, are you necessarily doing that? What do we do with the existing medical marijuana industry? Do you tax that? Well, that's taxing sick people. Not necessarily everyone's for that. How do you respect those that have been in this business a long time as it relates to the application of going forward with a legalized market? How do we learn from the lessons, long-windedly, from Colorado, the evidence now in about increased use or decreased use, about increased traffic accidents or decrease? And I say increase or decrease because I have 2 sets of studies that contradict each other. Some saying it's gone up, some saying it's gone down. And I guess it depends where your perspective was in the beginning, what stats you'll actually pull out to assert that point of view. So that's a very, it wasn't a cogent opening because I didn't read a statement. It's just sort of reflective thoughts about what brings me subjectively here as someone that's willing to say publicly, and I'll say this to you publicly, what many folks are saying privately, that it's time to move in a new direction. And the likelihood of something going on the ballot in 2016 is almost a statistical certainty. But it doesn't mean it will pass unless we can answer these tough questions, I think, in advance. And for the policymakers in Sacramento, I hope all of them are listening, because California is not Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska. It's all those states combined, plus all kinds of unique attributes that make California distinctive from all those other states, not least of which the mature nature of this industry that exists already through the application of our medical industry, but also the fact we're the largest agricultural producer and exporter of marijuana of any other state in this nation. We have our own unique challenges, so we should learn from, but not necessarily follow, the examples exclusively of those other states. So the elected officials in Sacramento appointed representatives of our bureaucracy, they need to be prepared, even if they oppose this, to making sure we apply the will of the voters in a thoughtful, judicious way that addresses the unintended consequences. And I think that's going to take time, and that's why we're here taking up your time today. So with that, my former alma mater, though I never got into law school, this guy did, but as a tenured professor of law at Santa Clara University, and he has kindly given his time, his energy, and his point of view and passion to chair this subcommittee. And David is going to go around and introduce our panelists, and we're going to have a conversation. We'll start with issues of DUI, and we'll get into other law enforcement and public safety issues. Then we'll open it up to you, and then we'll go to the second topic of conversation and do the same. So with that, David, thanks for being here, and thanks for all your support.
Oh, thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. I really appreciate that. And thanks to everyone who helped make this event possible, and to the steering committee of the Blue Ribbon Commission for selecting me to help facilitate this really important discussion. I just want to emphasize and echo what the Lieutenant Governor said, which is the focus of today's event is not about whether it would be desirable for California to regulate adult use of marijuana. The focus is about how, if Californians choose to go down this path, we can best design and implement policies that will maximize the social benefits and minimize the social harms. So today's event is about public safety, and broadly speaking, that encompasses a lot of critical issues that we're not going to have time to discuss today. Today we're going to be focusing generally on issues relating to driving under the influence of marijuana and the public safety challenges of transitioning grows and growers to a market with statewide regulations. So our format today is going to consist of two parts, dealing with each of those subjects. During each, we'll have some brief presentations, and be forewarned, Abdi will be cutting you off, followed by a limited amount of time for questions, some brief comments and questions from the audience, followed by a discussion with the commissioners and the other panelists. Because time is limited, and this is just one step in our process, we have provided feedback forms where members of the public and stakeholders in attendance today can share additional comments and ask additional questions that the BRC will do its best to address in its coming work. We want to hear from you, so please do fill out those forms. So let's begin with our first topic, driving under the influence of marijuana, or what I'll call DUI-M, to differentiate it from other drugs like amphetamines or heroin that might have very different impacts on driving under the influence. So the first and last question I'll start with is this: what should we do about DUI-M if marijuana is legalized? This is the purpose of our discussion, but of course it's already illegal to drive under the influence now. And so the question is, do we need new rules and new regulations, or do we simply need to enforce existing ones? Do we feel like the potential harms will increase in a legalized market, and if so, what are those harms? It turns out that the issues around the harms of DUI-M are not as clear-cut or as well studied as those for alcohol. We have a very good idea of what the risks are for driving while drunk, and legal standards such as .05, .08, and .10 are not randomly assigned. Each has a scientific basis in terms of the increase in crash risk with each of those blood alcohol levels. We have nothing like that for marijuana. Studies need to tell us not just how many of those who crashed had THC in their systems, but how many of those who had THC in their systems crashed. We need not only more data on crash risk in general, we need to know how much intoxication causes what increase in risk. We also have issues about how we can measure it, and what we can measure and how we can measure it. We know how to measure alcohol intoxication via blood alcohol level. The same isn't true necessarily of marijuana. Various biomarkers peak either before or long after the peak of intoxication. More importantly, for evidentiary purposes, alcohol degrades in a uniform and predictable manner, so intoxication at the time of a traffic stop can be determined even if the blood was drawn several hours later. The same is not true of marijuana. So one of our questions is whether we should instead use field sobriety tests, although those too were designed to test for alcohol-specific effects, and we need to change them. And as promised, that takes us back to our first question: what should we do about it? One answer might be that instead of thinking about new laws, we should think about enforcement techniques, resources, and priorities for our existing laws. So our first speaker on this important topic comes to us from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Please join me in welcoming Chris Murphy, who will talk us through some of what is known about marijuana and crash risk.
Thank you, David. I also want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for establishing this Blue Ribbon Commission. Excellent idea, and I'm glad to be a part of it. As David mentioned, he's asked me to look at some of the stats in terms of what we know and a little bit of what we don't know and what things Californians might want to consider. In looking at the dash, we test drivers that were killed in California that tested positive for drugs, and we see since 2009, it's increased from 27.8% to 30.6%. Now, this was the presence of drugs, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the driver was actually impaired. The most commonly found drug was cannabinoids, and 34.3% of drugs found among drivers that were killed and tested were tested for cannabinoids. The national average is about 26.6%, so as you can see, we're a little bit above that. When we look at alcohol in 2013, of those that were tested, about 38% of drivers had some presence of alcohol in their system. In February, we released the results of our national survey of alcohol and drug use by drivers, and last time we did it was 2007. We found that nearly 1 in 4 drivers tested positive for at least one potentially impairing drug or medication. The drug with the largest increase was THC. It increased by 50% from 2007 to 2013-14. And when you look at oral fluid testing, that jumped from 7.7% to 11.3%. That's important because oral fluid testing usually means that the drug was ingested recently, usually 2 to 3 to 4 hours. And when we looked at alcohol, we found at the same time alcohol dropped significantly. In 2007, it was 12.4%. In 2013-14, it dropped to 8.3% as far as alcohol. We also did a study in Virginia Beach in 2015 that came out that found there was modest but significant increases in crash involvement for drivers who tested positive for illegal drugs and THC. However, when we adjusted for age, gender, ethnicity, and alcohol concentration, the analysis did not show a significant increase in crash involvement in association with the presence of other drugs. But I think it's important to note, as our NHTSA Associate Administrator for Research and Program Development said, he said drivers should never get behind the wheel impaired, and we know that marijuana impairs judgment, reaction times, and awareness, and this was part of the study also. David asked me to kind of go over a few things that California might want to consider, and I think to kind of start off with, that's legislation. And what can we do? One of the things is, let's consider perhaps enhanced penalties. If someone is under the influence of drugs and alcohol, perhaps there should be an enhancement. We already have enhancement for high BAC. Matter of fact, 28 states, including California, have that law now. Typically what we find nationwide is that officers, once they get the alcohol charge, they will stop at the alcohol charge. So we're not getting the data that we need to have. There's no enhancements. Another point is we have people that need treatment that are not getting treatment because they're not getting charged with the impairment. So we're missing a whole stream of folks who are not getting the treatment that they actually need. With alcohol, we have the treatment piece. We just don't have that built in to the drugs. Another thing to consider is adopt per se drug impairment laws. 15 states have such laws. Something to consider. Mandatory testing of all fatally injured drivers for drugs and alcohol. Again, we need more data. Oral fluid drug screening devices. NHTSA encourages states to explore the benefits of policies that would allow for the use of oral fluid drug screening devices as part of the criminal justice process, and perhaps expand the existing administrative license revocation law for drug-impaired drivers who fail or refuse a drug test. Currently, Arizona and I believe Michigan have those laws. What else can we do? Just a few things. Law enforcement needs more training in drug detection. California already leads the way, but there's more that can be done. Establish standardized screening methodologies for drug testing. Nationwide, there is a lack of consistency in the range of drugs tested between laboratories and the cutoffs or analytical thresholds used by labs. Conduct timely drug screening and confirmations. It shouldn't take 6 months to a year to get the results back. It's critical that we get these results back. train more prosecutors in expert testimony and scientific evidence, fund state-of-the-art drug testing equipment so labs have the information that they need, initiate grants to cities and counties for vertical prosecution grants so we can fund more prosecutors that are dedicated from when someone is arrested until they're adjudicated. They can work with the victims' families if a victim was involved. The vertical prosecution program is a fantastic program. We have 22 of these grants right now in California. We should look perhaps to expanding those. Perhaps create a statewide drug impaired driving task force. And we need more public awareness. Most campaigns talk about alcohol. We seem to leave the drugs out. And I think social norming messaging, such as Colorado has done, is a great, great start. And finally, we talk about, as David mentioned, how difficult it is as far as the research between alcohol with an 08 and trying to get something similar for marijuana. NHTSA believes, because of the way many things that David mentioned, that it will probably take decades of research to get the legal limit for marijuana, such as we have for alcohol. Matter of fact, it's difficult to determine when or if we will ever have the same kind of measurement for marijuana as we do alcohol.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ken Corney, who's Chief of Police for the City of Ventura, and he's here in his capacity today as first Vice President of the California Police Chiefs Association, and he's going to talk about DUID and other issues.
So thank you, David, for chairing this, and Lieutenant Governor, thank you very much for bringing the commission forward. It's an important conversation to have. I want to start off by talking about kind of going off what Chris said about the implications of not having a presumed level of impairment or intoxication for impairment. As probably we all know, in California, the legal limit for blood alcohol is 0.08, and there's a lot of education, a lot of information out there that tells people you drink this much, you weigh this much, and this is when you're going to be over the legal limit. And there's science backing that creates an impairment, and that impairment is a danger on the roadways. The science is not there yet with marijuana, and it becomes a problem for our communities, for our safety, in the striving of law enforcement to reduce harm in our communities, not to be able to have a presumed level of intoxication where you can prove impairment with marijuana. I think as we move forward, there is some promising tests on the horizon. Oral fluids, as it was mentioned, saliva is currently being looked at as it can identify the recent presence of drugs in the system, such as marijuana. But again, backing out to what percentage that is and whether it causes impairment or not is where we have to catch up with science. And I think as we move forward with the debate over legalizing or recreationalizing drugs such as marijuana, we have to stop and think about the impact to the safety of our families and our communities on the roadway, not being able to move forward accurately with some type of scientific measurement that proves impairment. We've done tremendous strides in California and nationally, and a lot of Chris's work in California as his tenure with OTS director in educating and preventing drunk driving under the influence of alcohol. But we're going to start over a little bit with marijuana, and it is important for all of us to realize that how critical it is to have the science there and to catch up. I've spent a lot of time researching and speaking with law enforcement agencies and government entities in Colorado and learning about what the impact is so far. Now, we have to remember that Colorado didn't do a great job of measuring things before legalization, recreationalization of marijuana came in. So it's hard to compare apples to apples all the time, but that doesn't mean we can't look at the data now and consider it and look forward to California, what we need to consider and how we can move forward successfully. Just to point out a few things that were recently released from Colorado is that the Colorado State Police, out of 874 drunk drivings in 2014, 41% of them were, when I said drunk drivings, I mean driving under the influence of drugs. 41% of them were involved in marijuana, and 77% involved marijuana and other drugs. The Denver Police Department, driving under the influence of drugs increased. It doubled in 2014 when compared to just 2013. Aurora, Colorado, there's been a 66% increase in driving under the influence of drugs. Larimer County Sheriff's Office in Colorado, again, a 60% increase in DUIDs that have been identified as marijuana being involved. So they're seeing increases in Colorado. They don't have a presumed limit, but they test for 5 nanograms per milliliter of blood for evidence that marijuana is in the system. Of course, the problem with that is marijuana gets into your fat and is stored in the fat, which it can show a positive test even after there's much longer after use, whereas oral fluids show that much more recently. Again, it's not a presumed limit in Colorado. It's just part of the evidence if there's a blood test indicating that. Chris talked a little bit about addiction. Information from the Arapahoe House, which operates 13 drug dependency treatment centers in the greater Denver metropolitan area. There are a 60% increase in clients reporting marijuana as their primary drug of choice. While there's no data that suggests that, we also have to look at the recreational marijuana industry in Colorado and the edibles and the concentrates and things that are arguably have a greater addiction or greater attraction for use not only by adults but by youth, causing that increase in addiction. And on the concept of youth use, which is really one of the real complexities of recreational use of marijuana, is because there's a lot of science behind the impact of marijuana on the adolescent brain and development issues and things like that. There's significant evidence to indicate youth use in marijuana has increased, and some of that that's reported by SAMHSA is that they show states that have legalized marijuana, and the states that have legalized either medical marijuana or recreational marijuana have a much higher incidence of youth use in the last month of youth between 12 and 17 years of age. The Colorado Department of Education reports a significant increase in school suspensions and expulsions involving drug violations, as many as 34% increase. And at the same time, suspensions for alcohol are going down. They're trending downward. In 2014, they were 2.7%. Alcohol was 2.7% of all expulsions, while drug-related suspensions were 41.9%. The Colorado Children's Hospital is reporting admissions, a significant increase in admissions. It nearly doubled in the first half of 2014 of youth under 12 with exposure to marijuana. And then the Rocky Mountain Poison Control Center has seen a increase of 10 times of reported exposure to children under 5 years of age of marijuana, and most often credited to the edibles, and the edibles are usually very high concentrate. So I think this again, I welcome this conversation, and I think Colorado is a petri dish that it will allow us to begin to look at some of the impacts and how we can best work around those impacts. You know, the war on drugs is not going to be won or lost with legalization. It's going to be if we legalize drugs, it doesn't mean the war's over, because the war is not about necessarily putting people in jail. The whole purpose behind the laws was to protect our communities, protect our children. And I think we have to consider that anything we do is based upon the fundamentals of why we establish laws, is to protect our communities, protect our children, and to move our society forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker on this topic is Kristen Nevedal, who's Program Director of Patient-Focused Certification at Americans for Safe Access.
Thank you. Let's see. Hopefully I'm close enough that you folks can hear me. So I'm here to talk about DUID or DUIM from a patient perspective. And in addition to being Director of Patient-Focused Certification for Americans for Safe Access, I'm also a mother of 3 teenagers, and 2 of them are driving. And I'm also myself a patient after a severe car accident. I think, we've heard some of the issues with how marijuana is tested for in the system. From a patient perspective, per se laws really can mean that driving as a patient is illegal, period. And the reason why that often happens is because THC may be present in the blood of regular medical marijuana users for several hours or even days after past use. Definitely long after the performance impairing effects of the drug have subsided. Additionally, marijuana's primary inert metabolite, THC-COOH, is detectable in urine for weeks or sometimes even months after past use. Obviously meaning that impairment is no longer happening for that individual, yet when per se laws are put into place, whether that per se law has a threshold such as 5 nanograms, 2 nanograms, 10 nanograms, whatever it may be, or say a zero tolerance per se law, patients can be pulled over completely sober, not having utilized medication for 24 hours or more even, and still find themselves being cited with a DUID citation. Many states, as we heard, have put per se limits in place. Along with that, what hasn't been mentioned is that a lot of those states do provide exemptions for patients, so that as patients are brought into being tested for DUID, there is some protections for them and some consideration for the fact that they are a regular user of medical marijuana for medical conditions. Another thing that I want to mention about what we need to be looking at to help bring forward some sensible policy around DUID really goes back to proper labeling and testing. There's a couple different considerations. A lot of these studies are really done surrounding inhalation methods. I think that's where primarily we've seen the focus on DUID, nanogram studies, and impairment happen. What we do know is that inhalation of cannabis often is short-lived in impairment, lasting anywhere from an hour to maybe 2 hours. But again, this really has a lot to do with the strength of the cannabis, the amount of THC that's present, as well as the amount that's consumed. When we look at ingesting cannabis, whether it's in a brownie, a cookie, a capsule form, the product reacts very differently internally in the body, and the length of impairment is much longer. But again, largely determined based on the amount of THC, how much CBD is present in that product, and the potency of the edible or the ingested form of cannabis. These considerations are all going to have to be taken into place, but when we come back to what a patient needs moving forward, it really has a lot to do with standardized testing practices being implemented and put into place so that labeling is appropriate and accurate. Currently, without standardized testing, there is some concern that patients are getting more or less than what the label says, which makes it very hard for a patient to know what to expect from their products sometimes. Also, consistency can be challenging under these conditions. So a patient who is relying on ingested forms of cannabis may have a product one day that says 5 milligrams of THC in it, and then may take that same product the next day and have it be a stronger or a lighter dosage. So we do have a tremendous amount of work to do, not just in the research of how marijuana affects impairment and what that looks like, but also how we properly label and help patients understand what it is they're taking, what those concentrations are, and what kind of titration they're going to be getting themselves into through using these products. I also want to say that coming from a patient perspective and working for Americans for Safe Access, we really do not want to see patients or any consumers on the road during impaired times with medical cannabis or adult use cannabis. So I'm really excited that we have this conversation happening. I think that not just with this committee, but with other committees within the Blue Ribbon Commission, we're going to see hopefully some really great standards go into place as we move forward with regulating medical marijuana as well as adult use here in California.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do now is Abdi Sultani is going to go out into the audience, and if you have a question or comment, brief question or comment, he'll come to you, and we'll gather a couple of these, and then we'll have some discussion from panelists and commission members.
So we're asking for, first I want to thank everyone who's spoken. We're right on the dot in terms of time, so thank you very much, everybody. So I'm going to ask for, if you have a question or a comment, we're going to ask if you could limit it to 1 minute so we can hear from a variety of people. So if I could see a couple of hands. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. Hi, my name is Michael Backus. Does this commission have any understanding of the profound impact that the actual chemical constituency of California cannabis varieties will have on public health and safety over the coming decades? Because if this commission does not understand the impact of cannabinoid and terpenoid entourages on human cognitive and motor performance in today's cannabis versus cannabis as it was used for the prior 10,000 years, then how can the commission's recommendations result in sound, evidence-based policy? Thank you.
Let me see other hands. I'm going to keep the microphone if you don't.
Okay. I'm just curious. Basically, I mean, she already posted it, that the big problem are with the edibles, and then also with the regulation of quote-unquote THC levels in medical marijuana and all the different edibles and how they are marketed and made into like candies and things like that. How are you guys addressing that issue? And do we even need medical marijuana once it's made recreational?
My name is Lanny Swardlow, Brownie Mary Democratic Club. I have a question for Mr. Murphy. During the period of time that you quoted those statistics between 2007 and 2013, that there is increases and decreases, what was the traffic fatalities? Did they go up? Did they go down? Did they stay the same? Thank you.
Are you talking about total traffic fatalities?
We'll get a couple more questions. We'll get a couple more questions.
I saw a hand here. Okay. I'll hang on.
Okay. I appreciate everything that Ms. Nevedal said about the need for testing and labeling, but I wonder if there's going to be any consideration of the variability between patients. Science has borne out that there is a tremendous difference on the effect of cannabis on long-term users with chronic conditions, and we know that they're not affected in the same way. So I'm wondering if the Commission is going to take that into account. Thank you.
My question's in response to some of the data that Ken Corney gave, although I'd invite anyone else on the panel to respond. He noticed an increase in percentage of DUIs involving marijuana, but I'm wondering what the overall total was. I'm curious to see whether drivers are substituting marijuana for alcohol, or if there's simply more marijuana use and more alcohol use as well.
Oh, well, while we're here, okay.
Hi, this is Magdaleno Rose Avila, and I wondered about the statistics also because I would like to have a comparison. Did meth use and cocaine or heroin go down in terms of when they stop people on DUIs? So I think unless we know the comparison to other drugs being used, we don't know what the real effects of cannabis is in Colorado.
Abdi, one or two more, do you think, or? Yep. Okay.
My question's kind of along those lines. I wonder if there is any effort to look at the implications of our language when we talk about this, because I noticed even amongst this educated panel, some people are using the word drug, some people are using the word marijuana. Somebody threw in THC and somebody else CBD, and I think that if we're trying to educate a general population on this, it's really important to understand the implications of those very distinctive words.
So let's get one more hand. Okay, while I'm here, if you don't mind.
If the panel could talk about some of the implications of taking marijuana from our current nonprofit and medical model to a for-profit model and how that might implicate social norms and visibility and access to youth. That would be great.
So we're going to hold the questions here. You do all have a feedback form on which we'll appreciate any additional comments or questions, and we are going to do our best to take all of this into consideration. So I apologize that we couldn't get to everyone's questions.
So I'm going to just respond generally to take my, I guess, moderator's privilege to talk briefly and just to remind everyone, this is the first of 3 public forums. So we have the next one is on May 19th in Northern California that's going to be about youth education and prevention. And then there's going to be one on June 3rd in Fresno that's going to talk about taxation and regulation. And I think that that's obviously these issues overlap considerably. And I personally, I've been to meetings of both because I think that those do touch on issues of public safety, and that's what I was alluding to when I said that the public safety is can be quite widely drawn, and we've seen the ways in which issues about, say, labeling might relate to driving under the influence concerns, or even regulations about edibles. The gentleman's question about edibles, you know, are there taxation or regulations that we want to have that encourage certain ways of consuming marijuana that might promote public safety, or do we want to, you know, make sure that it's very difficult to consume ways that we consider to be particularly harmful to the public safety? So I just wanted to sort of throw that out there. The other thing that I want to say is that a lot of these questions do require more research. One of the things that and these questions have certainly pointed that out, is that this is a really complicated issue. Not only do we have individual variation with strain strengths or with individual tolerances and with ways of consuming, but there are lots of different issues. So I really do appreciate the thoughtfulness of it, and these questions are a sign of really why this conversation is needed. So with that, I'm going to see if anyone would like to respond to any questions.
Chris, you want to take on that specific question regarding traffic fatalities?
Sure, Lieutenant Governor, I just happen to have the stats. Was the question, okay, just in case, was the question about total deaths or alcohol? What was the question?
Well, you had said that the same period of time, the traffic fatalities go up, they go down, or they stay the same.
In 2007 in California, we had 3,995 traffic deaths. In 2013, 3,000. Alcohol impaired driving, we had 1,132, 867 in 2013. 2010 and 11, we had our lowest number of DUI deaths ever in California. In the last 2 years, they've been going up.
Yeah, so these studies are all available on the agency's website, and we are making links to our website. And you can also email the commission, and we'll try to provide access to some of that information. Thank you, Chris.
I'd like to respond to a couple of the questions, if that's okay. One of the questions about meth use and heroin use in DUIDs, I think that the statistics there are really confusing, and part of the reason why is that when an individual consumes methamphetamine or heroin, it doesn't have the half-life that cannabis does. So it doesn't leave residual metabolites in the bloodstream. So it really requires an immediate test. It doesn't linger like cannabis does for days or weeks on end. And I also wanted to respond to the question about, do we need medical marijuana after adult use? And I would say absolutely. What we're seeing in other states is when we focus on an adult use law, the tendency is to focus on, I guess inebriation is a good word, more so than the medical benefits of the plant. Currently, patients are receiving benefits from the broad spectrum of products that are on the marketplace right now. We have everything from topicals to capsules to tinctures. and a broad spectrum of cannabinoids and terpenes that are available. If we look specifically at what has happened in Washington with taxation and the I-502 stores not being able to discuss any of the medical benefits of cannabis, there has been no incentive or financial availability for these companies to provide CBD-rich products, tinctures, topicals. It just simply does not fit into the tax bracket. So it would be very sad to lose medical cannabis in California because we would potentially lose its place as a botanical and nutraceutical product to help patients in the future.
I would just want to point out, we talk about the impairment and the process for somebody being suspected of driving impaired, whether it's alcohol or drugs, is first of all some kind of incident that occurs. It could be an accident, but it's always related to some type of some type of driving pattern or driving behavior, which either causes an accident or draws the officer's attention. Past then, there's a field sobriety test, a series of field sobriety tests that are designed to identify impairment. So when we get to the level of or discussion of whether or not somebody has a level which causes impairment, it's not a random. It's all based upon reasonable suspicion and probable cause that an officer in the field would find as they investigated an incident. I just want to make sure everybody's clear that we're not talking about the random testing. If you have THC in your system, you're automatically assumed to be impaired. And of course, that goes to the argument that once we get to where we can have a presumptive level of THC that's identified as causing impairment, it would, much like alcohol has at 0.08 BAC, it will help us protect our roadways and our communities. And just for the question about the data, I think I mentioned briefly that Colorado, the issue is they weren't measuring a lot of this stuff before legalization, so it's really hard to differentiate between marijuana, other drugs, and some other things that we wish we could go back and look at now. But I'll give everybody a website that and hopefully it'll make it on the web page here for the commission. But it's www. Let me start off again. www.rmhidta.org. rmhidta.org. And there's a series of reports about the impacts of a legalization of marijuana in Colorado on that website.
One other thing I want to point out that's another issue about the complexity is substitution effects of alcohol and opiates or other drugs for marijuana. I feel obliged to give a hat tip to Mark Kleiman, who is currently a faculty member here, although he's going to NYU, who said that if 10,000 people switch from using alcohol to marijuana, the public safety benefits, the public health benefits would be enormous because alcohol is so destructive. Now, whether or not you agree with that, I think it does point out this interesting question of, looking at marijuana. I think we do need to think about that in terms of whether or not that's substituting for other possible drug usage. Maybe it means that people stop drinking coffee and they go to marijuana and it's actually worse. I don't know, but I do think it's important to establish that in marijuana as opposed to what other substance people are using. Abelardo, you wanted to?
Yes. As a member of the commission, I just wanted to make one statement about the issue of addiction in marijuana, that the jury is really still out on that. And, right now there is a large NIH study that's just beginning to focus on the long-term effects on marijuana in the brain over the period of adolescence. And this, I think, will extend 15, 20 years. So, that somehow the brain is damaged by marijuana, even during adolescence or beginning in adolescence, is not definitive yet. So we have to really, I think, wait for the science on that. And I think that at least from my perspective, I think one of the issues that we have in terms of public safety is the issue of access to minors of marijuana, and that's something that we can all work on in terms of a public education perspective. So I'll leave it at that.
And just very briefly, just so folks know, we've got a number of other studies that we'll put on the website as well, and there's some independent studies of those studies that are also analyzing the veracity of the data sets. Again, with stats, you can manipulate stats by just moving the bar 3 weeks, a month, 3 months. So you've got some reports are showing a decline in use between 12 and 17-year-olds in Colorado, reduction in DUI arrests. You've got reports showing property crimes actually lower in that state. And then you've got the contradictory report the chief has just advanced. And then you've got Brookings Institute, for example, that's looked at all these data sets and come up with their own conclusions. So again, depending on which set of eyes you're using, folks can come to certain conclusions. But nonetheless, this is all new data. The chief's absolutely right to make the point that it's hard to even have that baseline data because of that we don't necessarily have this sort of objective analysis beforehand. So it's all new. One could overstate, one can understate, but I hope you'll take the time, all of you, to sort of look through the filter of these perspectives and come to your own conclusion. And we've got all of this on our platform, so I hope you'll take the time to look at that. And by the way, and I want to underscore, those questions were fantastic. It's exactly why, as an elected official, those that so quick to conclude a point of view on this, I hope maintain at least a willingness to consider other points of view. This is complicated. This is tough stuff. It's not easy. It requires, I think, the kind of diligence we're putting into this. I'll just say what I didn't say beforehand. If you're like me, you're frustrated. In California in particular, we're very good at putting things on the ballot, and then we sit there and go, what the hell did we just do? I didn't vote for that, or that wasn't constitutional, or it was, or we locked out revenue and locked in expenses, or vice versa. Whether you support this discussion or not, I hope you at least understand why we're having it in advance of an initiative, as opposed to waiting till after the initiative and then trying to deal with the consequences with a windshield, or rather with a rear view mirror, not a windshield, in mind. That was a terrible analogy, but I'm searching for one.
Back to David.
Okay, well, thanks everyone again. I also just want to reiterate what the Lieutenant Governor said. That was those are really helpful questions, and I know that we might not have delved into our answers with the depth that it required. We are limited by time, but again, I do encourage you to fill out your feedback form, and I and the other commissioners are taking notes about what has been discussed and what's been raised here, and we're hoping to get into some of that with more depth, as we produce more of our reports and further our thinking about it. So the question to which we now turn concerns the human and environmental legacies of prohibition. So what do we do about unregulated grows, especially those on public lands, and what do we do about those with prior marijuana convictions? So transitioning from the black and gray markets, I just want to underscore, involves not just production, but it also involves people. So there's particularly salient issues on our first issue of public safety when it comes to unregulated cultivation. Unregulated grows can damage human and animal habitat, and marijuana cultivation uses a lot of water. You may have heard we have a problem with that now. Water usage that is not regulated in the way that California's other agricultural products are. So grows on public lands can also physically endanger those who come across them while hiking or out camping in the wilderness. So our first speaker in this part of our discussion will address grows on public lands. Paul Gallegos is the former district attorney of Humboldt County. And Paul, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm not sure if this is actually working too hard. So, as was indicated, large-scale marijuana cultivation has causes significant environmental harm in the state of California. The reduction of this environmental harm is important for the people in this state, regardless of your position on whether marijuana should be legal or not. According to the U.S. Department of Justice National Drug Intelligence Center's 2009 Domestic Cannabis Cultivation Assessment, there are no reliable estimates available regarding the amount of domestically produced marijuana. Moreover, estimates are not feasible due to significant variability in or the non-existence of data regarding the number of cannabis plants that aren't eradicated during an eradication season. According to the 2009 assessment, during 2008, more marijuana was eradicated in the United States than ever before. However, no major price fluctuations were reported. This would seem to support the conclusion that these eradication efforts had no significant impact on supply, either short-term or long-term. The 2009 assessment continues by saying that while no conclusive estimates are available regarding the amount of cannabis grown in the United States, eradication statistics provide an indicator of the extent of cultivation. According to the 2009 assessment, the number of plants eradicated from domestic cannabis cultivation sites increased substantially in each of the past 5 years. In 2008, more than 8 million plants were eradicated in the United States, a 14% increase over 2007. 94% of all plants eradicated in the United States were from outdoor cultivation sites. Marijuana cultivation and eradication levels are consistently higher in California than any other state. According to the 2009 assessment, 5,322,053 marijuana plants were eradicated in California in 2008. That accounted for 60% of the total of 8,013,308 marijuana plants eradicated that year. This was an increase up from 4,951,976 marijuana plants eradicated in California in 2007, which was 70% of the national cannabis plants eradicated. These eradication statistics provide an indicator that California produces nearly 70% of the nation's marijuana crop. Marijuana, as was indicated, is a water and nutrient-intensive crop. Some research suggests that marijuana plants consume up to 6 gallons of water per day over a 150-day growth cycle, or 900 gallons of water per life of that marijuana plant. If one reflects on the 5,322,053 eradicated marijuana plants in 2008 and multiplies that by the number of 900, we can start to get a partial picture of the amount of water that is being used to cultivate marijuana in California. And that is a very partial picture. Compared to more established forms of agriculture where winter stream flow is often captured and stored locally for later use, marijuana cultivation is typically irrigated with summer and fall surface waters diversions directly from headwater streams and springs. These diversions significantly eliminate or reduce the stream flow, particularly in drought years like we're experiencing, and they threaten the survival of rare and endangered salmonids, amphibians, and other animals. Land terracing, clearing, and road construction associated with marijuana cultivation also removes native vegetation and habitat and increases erosion. Erosion increases fine sedimentation in streams, damaging spawning and rearing habitat for salmon and trout. Marijuana cultivation also pollutes watersheds and poisons wildlife with the use of pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and petroleum fuels. This is on both public and private land. The environmental impact of marijuana cultivation is not prevented by growing indoors. That merely adds increased energy consumption to the equation. Assuming that each of the 5,322,053 eradicated plants referenced in the DOJ's 2009 assessment would only have a value of $1,000 had they been allowed to grow, the value of California's eradicated marijuana in 2008 was $5.3 billion. If that represented only 20% of all the marijuana grown in California, which is unlikely based on the lack of impact of the cost, then each plant had a value of only $1,000. The value of marijuana grown in California in 2008 would exceed the $21.24 billion value of California's total non-marijuana agricultural exports, or in 2013. This would mean that marijuana is California's most valuable agricultural product. Using the 2009 assessment data, we can assume that 90% of that marijuana is grown outdoors. And because it is a largely unregulated industry, most of it is grown outdoors using those practices already mentioned that are causing significant, if not profound, environmental harm. This data suggests that the scale of the environmental harm for marijuana is immense, and that the existing marijuana market in California, if appropriately regulated and taxed, could provide substantial funds for necessary studies of the environmental impacts of marijuana cultivation and processing, improved enforcement and implementation of environmental regulations, and for the amelioration of existing pre-regulation and taxation environmental harms. Colorado and Washington both allocate their projected $67 and $389 million tax revenues from legal recreational marijuana sales to state funds supporting public health and education. There is no reason why California cannot dedicate a portion of its tax and regulation revenues from marijuana to public health and education and environmental enforcement and harm reduction, and there is every reason why California should. It is important to start thinking about this now. We need to see this problem as an opportunity to create a regulatory scheme that will generate resources to improve the enforcement of existing environmental laws. We need to see this as an opportunity to work together to address this problem for the future generations. I am grateful to the Lieutenant Governor and the ACLU for bringing everyone together for this purpose, and I am proud to be a part of this effort. There is really very little or no data about the impact on public property, but clearly people have read about the illegal cultivation of marijuana on our public lands. These are long-term, these are problems that have developed since 1996. We need solutions, and I look forward to hearing people's discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Statistics about racial disparities in drug enforcement are alarming. Despite similar rates of marijuana usage, people of color in this country are many times more likely to be arrested for marijuana infractions. So if marijuana is no longer a crime in the state of California, what should we do about those who have been convicted of those offenses? Do we exonerate those who are currently serving? Do we wipe the records of those who have served? Do we leave the convictions where they are? Does it depend on what kind of offense it is? That is, do we have one set of rules for simple possession and another for cultivation or another for distribution? Harlan Grossman, former Superior Court Judge of Contra Costa County and former FBI agent and district attorney, will talk us through some of the issues relating to criminal records for marijuana offenses.
Thank you. Good morning. As David just referenced, I have close to 40 years of criminal justice experience, a lot of that involving throughout the years marijuana. I've had experience from the prosecution or possession of a single joint up to the importation of 25 tons of marijuana. There are significant issues, and referring back to Lieutenant Governor Newsom's comment, there are questions that need to be asked. I don't know that I have the answers. If, in fact, marijuana is legalized, I think immediately, in terms of especially simple possession offenses or cultivation for personal use offenses, those matters would be dismissed in court. Beyond that, there would be the recall of warrants for pending cases where people are not before the court. Another issue would be how to address the issue of outstanding fines and fees that might be in the system from prior convictions. Are they forgiven? Are they waived? How they will be addressed. Beyond the pending cases, then you get to the issue of prior convictions or retroactive expungement. And again, David just made reference to what offenses that would have to be determined. Certainly, I would think that simple possession offenses, which are currently an infraction, or cultivation for personal use or transportation for personal use, that those would be subject to expungement from somebody's record. There might be other issues related to other marijuana-related convictions, cultivation beyond personal use, transportation beyond personal use, sales or distribution of marijuana. I think there would also be an issue with respect to the current sentencing scheme for marijuana offenses beyond simple possession and cultivation for personal use. So, and I don't know what the outcome of that would be. There might be an argument that they should be lessened, that penalties should be lessened for cultivation beyond personal use, transportation beyond personal use, or sales of marijuana. On the other hand, to avoid black market implications, there might be a need to increase penalties to discourage people from engaging in that conduct once there is legal marijuana in California. Beyond those issues, there may be an issue with respect to state licensing and involvement in marijuana industry and sale and distribution of marijuana in an adult recreational market. I know that Washington State, in their Initiative 502, in terms of licensing, there is language that includes that prior criminal conduct may be considered in whether somebody may or may not be licensed. In California, we have experience through deferred entry of judgment in terms of entering treatment and completing a court requirement or under Prop 36 that went into effect that was on the ballot in 2000, there is language that if you successfully have completed those treatment programs, that the conviction is not to be considered to deny either employment, a benefit, a license, or a certificate. So it would seem to me that if marijuana is legalized, that whether or not you completed the DEJ, Deferred Entry of Judgment, or Prop 36, that prohibition against denying employment, benefit, license, or certificate might come into play. There are other issues in terms of this licensing, and as I understand it, there is not a licensing issue or provision within medicinal marijuana. So one question would be, do we need or do we want or should we have licensing requirements or standards in the legal recreational adult market? There might be an issue with respect to what about federal convictions, what about sister state convictions, and you might have to look into the actual underlying offenses in sister states. If it's not a crime in California, if it's no longer a crime in California, then the fact that you've suffered a conviction out of California for conduct that's no longer criminal in California, you should probably have that same benefit, that it won't impact your employment. I think the other good thing about the existence of the Blue Ribbon Commission is, as Lieutenant Governor Newsom has said, we can raise these issues, we can consider these issues, we can attempt to address them and be prepared to answer them if in fact there is an initiative on the ballot in 2016. Thank you.
Okay, so just a reminder, right now we're going to have some time for some questions and comments from the audience. Once again, Abdi is going to go into the audience, and we'll get several of these, and then we'll respond. Thank you.
I'm going to start in the back this time, but the microphone won't go far enough, so if you could come up to me here, that would be great. And I'll hang on to the microphone.
Sure. Hello. I just wanted to inquire about the fact that in states where marijuana has been legalized, there is still a problem with the black market. In fact, there was a state report in Colorado that said, despite it being legal, 60% only is sold legally in Colorado. So I know you did get into some of the penalties that might be brought down on people who sold illegally, but is there any measures specifically that you think would discourage people from selling marijuana legally?
Great question.
Hello, my name is David Bush. I'm a marijuana attorney and an environmental attorney, Prop 65. And these are issues I've been looking at for a long time, and there keeps coming up one issue I can't understand, and that is that marijuana doesn't grow under trees. So when these large illegal grows are going on, there are clear cuts going on at the top of hills, right? You don't even need a helicopter to find them. You can look from Google Earth and look down upon them. People are planting 20, 30,000 plants. They're bringing up nutrients, plastic tubing, water, food, tents, and everything else for 10,000 plants. And we can't see that off Google Earth. Why does, and I'm not accusing anybody, and I think America does have a level of corruption we all need to address. But why do the police force only come in at the end of the season? Everyone knows there's a season, and it's the end of the grow season when the police enforcement starts. Why don't they start as soon as that thing gets clear cut, before the plants ever get planted? It won't help the stats on plants eradicated, right? But it will help the environment. It will save the water and all the nutrients that go in there, and I think that's important. And I'm going to add, with relationship to the other issue, children. Sorry, I'm a lawyer. With children, we have to, I'm an epileptic, and we need to take into account the legal use of CBD marijuana for children in this whole issue of children that has not been even mentioned yet. That's a very important issue, except maybe by Kristen. Thank you.
Thanks.
Regarding Mr. Gallegos' presentation.
Standing in front of you.
Regarding Mr. Gallegos' presentation, I wonder how legalization might help with the problems that he mentioned, for example, encouraging water storage and the like. And I'd particularly like to hear what Ms. Nevedal would have to say about how the patient certification program she manages might help with that, and also what she thinks about the 900-gallon estimate that he mentioned.
Is there another question in the back before I leave? Okay.
Bruce Margolin, good afternoon, good morning. I'm concerned about the remarks we've made regarding expungement of records and how you delineate between personal cultivation and possession for sale cultivation, which is not in the statutes, for one example. And of course we know, and I do as a criminal defense attorney, how many people have been wrongfully convicted or gave up pleas in order to avoid a trial who would be unjustly discriminated against if you don't destroy all those records. I think it's appropriate and should be thought about very seriously. Thank you.
I'm going to take, if you don't mind, I'll just jump to the front.
My name is Sarah Armstrong. I'm Director of Industry Affairs for Americans for Safe Access. My question involves cultivation licenses. All 4 of the regulatory medical marijuana bills pending in the state legislature require a local license for cultivators. And I assume if the panel goes with local control, they'll also ask for this. That simply doesn't exist much in the state of California. So we have this horrible conundrum where the state would like us to produce something that just doesn't exist. I would like to hear from the panel about how they plan to solve this problem and perhaps put some pressure on localities to begin addressing the issue.
How are we on time, David?
Sure, you can
One
take
more?
one more question.
Okay.
Tony Margulies, Little Tomato Concepts, agricultural lighting designer, efficient lighting. I work with Philips and a lot of large companies and a lot of farms. I see a lot of pollution happening in the commercial environment. Philips is one of our largest providers of HID lighting to grow farms. What are we going to do about these big Fortune 500s that are providing tools for illegal grows, and we're not even talking to these people? That's my question.
Okay. So I want to go ahead and throw it open to the rest of the panel. People want to take answers to. Anyone want to get us started?
Well, to the ones that addressed records and expungement, in California, under 11358 Health and Safety Code, there is a definition of cultivation for personal use, and somebody who's been charged with cultivation for personal use, or there's an acknowledgement that it was for personal use, would be eligible for treatment under either DEJ PC 1000 or the Prop 36. In terms of how to curtail black marketing of marijuana, I don't have the answer to that. And again, it may be that you try to increase the penalties, or you just have increased enforcement. There was reference, I think Chief Corney mentioned, that there's going to be a need for, or actually it might have been Mr. Murphy, that there needs to be additional resources to law enforcement for training and drug recognition and dealing with the issue of what has become more, if you will, I think, an issue. If you have a legalized system of distribution, then there shouldn't be an illegal side of that distribution. So there's going to have to be increased enforcement in that regard, and increased law enforcement training to be prepared to deal with it.
And let me just say, I mean, it's absolutely true in Colorado. You've got the bleed of folks that still using their medical cards that may not necessarily have medical condition. And there's a concern in California. And one of the big concerns we bring out in this report is what's the tax? If you're taxing at 25+%, and then you've got local taxes on top of that, all of a sudden you're taxing this where you're, in essence, encouraging a black market. You're encouraging folks that aren't necessarily getting taxed at a medical facility to continue to use a medical facility even for non-medical needs. And so the question for us, and this goes to the taxation side of the equation, of course, all these things bleed together, so I don't want to necessarily negate this conversation, is do you start with a lower tax in order to expose that and encourage people to come to the light of day? Do you have a punitive framework as it relates to being more aggressive on the illegal side, even for illegally sourcing medical when you have no medical condition? How do we balance that? Do you then start increasing the tax over time as the industry matures and we transition from the old to the new? So all these things are legitimate concerns, and that's a big issue in Colorado. It's clear in that first year that the evidence suggests, again, that people are still utilizing, accessing through the illicit market. Not surprising. It's just 1 year of a radical departure from the status quo to a new system. There's also an intercommerce concern. Again, we're not, none of us are naive on the public safety side or the legal side that federal government has their laws. And you have a current Department of Justice and an Attorney General that feels one way. You may have a very different Department of Justice and a new administration and federal executives that may feel very differently. And there is a concern if you can't transport it across state boundaries, and we've seen an increase. There's been a lot of interdiction as it relates to arrests for people that have obviously been stockpiling the drug to send it out of Colorado. That's another statistic we've seen increase that has been, I haven't seen contradicted. That's a concern, obviously, in California, particularly as it relates, as you're pointing, the estimates of 60 to 70% of the nation's drug being produced here in our state. That will continue, and that must be, by definition, illicit and illegal because that's not afforded through our state effort here. So this is a very important concern, and that's why I think we have to be very careful here not to overpromise that you're going to eliminate that black market overnight. By any stretch of the imagination. There were a couple other questions, and just to jump in, legalization of water storage. So all these concerns about the environment are concerns that have existed in other states as well. The environmental community is really stepping up. It's interesting. Almost every major environmental group in California is making the case that the attorney just made. And they're also making a case, not surprisingly, well, in Colorado, Washington, they're not providing any resources for us to address those concerns. We hope you'll consider some resource consideration in any legalization strategy in California. But the issue of water use, abuse, these pesticides. How do you, Paul, think about this in the context of a legalized market? How radically do things change? And what does Humboldt look like? I mean, what's the sentiment up there generally from a public safety, law enforcement, and land use perspective? What's the lay of the land? Literally in this case.
I don't know that we have time really for me to address that. But these are difficult questions. Start off with that. I think that you have as many opinions in Humboldt County as you have people engaged in the business and in living in Humboldt County. Water usage is significant, the water problems that it's caused. The impact on wildlife is significant. Law enforcement has worked to change the paradigm in enforcement towards the environmental aspects of marijuana cultivation. When I was district attorney, we worked with our agencies to get them to take CAL FIRE, water quality, environmental health up there so that we could do an environmental investigation and prosecution because the marijuana aspects alone were not important. We did try to go up at all times of the year because we wanted to get people in the fall too, after their crop had...
Enforcement.
And enforcement after their crop had been harvested. We wanted to go up and see the rain running down those unpaved roads that was going into the rivers so that we could charge 5650, the impact on the water. And there are, one of the problems in Humboldt County and many of the rural counties is, it's, as I define it, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. The resources that are needed to effectively regulate and prosecute, if you will, what's currently going on don't exist. So the idea that I've been toying with is if it was legalized and it was regulated and taxed, we would pull a large amount of people out of the non-compliant pool, which would allow us to utilize existing resources on the non-compliant group. We would also be able to derive resources from those people that are violating the law to go after them. 17200 of the Business and Professions Code, unfair business practices. We prosecuted or sued cultivators or some cultivators when they said they were growing lawfully under the Compassionate Use Act for their environmental harms. Under 17200, we could get $2,500 per violation. So that money goes right under Prop 64, it goes right back to enforcement services. It's a trust account the district attorney's office of whatever county would have for the purposes of prosecuting or suing businesses that are engaged in unlawful business practices. And growing marijuana or tomatoes in violation of the law, you're not adequately getting permitted, you're drawing water illegally, you're impacting the environment, is an unfair business practice because you have an unfair advantage over that marijuana cultivator that's done everything to comply with the law. One of the problems in Humboldt County and elsewhere is for those people that are growing marijuana under the Compassionate Use Act that want to be lawful, they have all the or they feel that they are responsible to comply with the law, but they get no protections from the law. And until we have a system that provides those people the protections of the law, we are incentivizing their continued non-engagement, if you will, in a legal system.
Time for one more comment from Abelardo. Whoops.
Yeah, real quickly, I, as a commission member, I'm a little concerned about this illegal market. If we're saying 40% is still going to be, cannabis can be sold in illegal market, and the question is who's going to participate in that legal market? I can surmise it's probably going to be people who are poor or minority populations, and so we're going to then prosecute and convict those people, so we'll end up kind of an unintended consequence of having a disproportionate number of minorities being arrested for this. So I think it's something that we need to think through carefully.
I'm conscious of our time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up that discussion. I wanted just to maybe pull out three themes here. So it seems like one of the themes that's arisen is statewide control really of the existing medical marijuana market, that a lot of the problems that people are pointing out or a lot of the questions people have are about that existing framework. That's really sort of outside the purview of a new proposition, but there isn't any reason why we couldn't possibly try to see some action happening. It would require legislative action on that, but it would certainly be, I think, welcomed by at least by me and some other members of the commission. The second question, the second theme really is that so many of these issues, as I mentioned, overlap, particularly with taxation and regulation. You'll be pleased to know that one of our co-chairs, Sam Kamen, was Governor Hickenlooper's sort of point person in Colorado for establishing their regulated market. And again, that event is going to be June 3rd in Fresno. We also have the Youth Education and Prevention event on May 19th in Northern California. And I guess the last thing that I want to say is that, you know, we do, one of the questions that we need to ask going forward is, again, about resources to enforce existing statutes and regulations versus creating new statutes and regulations. And so we've heard a lot about that. I think most of us know that what happens with a proposition is that lots of promises are made about where the money is going to go. But it seems like that one of the things that has been, that I've heard up here anyway, has been the need for more research and also the need for enforcement and things that go along with enforcement, like public education and training of officers and things like that. So as we're considering how to move forward, perhaps we should consider at least making our new regulations of the adult market pay for themselves rather than promising what untold spoils to a whole bunch of other organizations. So with that, I'm going to leave closing comments to the Lieutenant Governor. Thanks.
And it just, is there any final words as you've been just sort of desperate, right at the tip of your tongue you wanted to share? Yes, I knew it, Kristen. I could tell. You read physiology.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to respond to the water questions and how to regulate cannabis cultivation specifically. And ultimately what we're dealing with is a very large agricultural crop that's unregulated. And once we put this back into the place of agriculture, then we really start to answer some of the questions with pesticides, best management practices, and environmental practices. But also the large numbers that were quoted really have a lot to do with how policy is developed. So in a plant count-based policy, cultivators are encouraged to grow the very largest plants possible, which means a 5-month growing cycle, which is where the 150 days comes from. If we look at what agriculture does, they put all agricultural crops are grown kind of based on their square footage of cultivation, which really allows for not only an estimate of the amount of matter or product that's going to be produced, but it also allows cultivators to reduce that growing cycle to about 3 months. Smaller plants take much less water than very large plants that are 14 feet tall and 10 by 10. So we can really reduce some of that with a sensible cultivation policy. Thank you.
All right, Chief, yeah. Just I wanted to let everybody know there's currently an Assembly bill, AB 266, sponsored by Assemblymember Cooley that we're working with, which has makes some inroads to greater regulation in the medical marijuana industry in California. It might be helpful in helping us figure out how to best move forward in terms of recreational use.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chief. Any final comments, Your Honor?
Thank you.
Nothing? Good. Well, let me just, again, thank all of you very much for the beginning of the conversation. Here's just a quick lay of the land. There are a number of people out there that are eager to move forward with an initiative in 2016. Many have drafted initiatives. The hope and expectation is we don't have multiple initiatives that confuse and confound the voters and create a situation where potentially we fall short of some people's hopes and expectations. The goal is to try to build some consensus. I'm not convinced on this topic or many topics that you can build unanimity of thought, but we can, I think, respect each other's points of view. And I want to just say this, and I mean this with absolute conviction and sincerity. Law enforcement has been remarkably constructive in this state, in this conversation. And I can't imagine 20 years ago I could have necessarily thought or believed that. Of course, never believed we'd be where we are, public opinion either. But I want to just express my appreciation, Chief, to you and many of your colleagues, to those in law enforcement that, may not be supportive, but understand the practical realities. And if we're going to do this, we want to make sure it's done right, and we're protecting public safety, and we're protecting our kids, and protecting our communities. And so I'm just grateful for the voice at this table, and I want folks to know that this is not the last time when we talk about public safety, and I want to encourage folks to participate. We've got this new site. It's a long one, Safe and Smart Policy. SafeandSmartPolicy.org. But to keep throwing your questions and your concerns, and we're creating these discussion and chat rooms. We're creating a platform where we're going to take your information. You may have studies, you may have points of view that you want to share, and we're going to incorporate that. In about 90 days or so, we're going to come out with sort of our final report, correct?
You got it.
That may leave some people wanting because it's not prescriptive enough, may leave people concerned that it was a little overly prescriptive, that said, well, why'd you lean in here but didn't lean in there? And the idea is not just, again, to inform those that are putting together a ballot, which, again, is happening as we speak, but also policymakers in Sacramento to start thinking through these things so they can anticipate a 2016 ballot. We have not only the May 19th up in the Bay Area and the Fresno June 3rd, but we'll be in Humboldt, which may be the most interesting of all meetings. Those who want to travel north, among the most beautiful parts of the state, I have to be cautious. Every part of the state is unique and special. But Humboldt will be interesting. It won't be part of the formal role, but I have had more elected officials representing that area saying, please, 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 get up there. You need to get up there. We need to have a robust conversation about the unique challenges associated with land use and the environment and other related concerns the district attorney brought up. So anyway, long-windedly, thank you all so much for being here. David, thank you for your stewardship and leadership. And thank the ACLU in particular, because they were pretty good at suing me when I was mayor all the time. So I kind of like sitting here with them in this task force, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. In closing words, there's an old African proverb: if you want to move fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. It's the spirit of going far that brings me here together with you, and we hope we'll continue this conversation over the next few months. Thank you all very much.